Welcome to the Global Journalism Seminars. This is the briefing. Access to sources, government persecution. Some of the challenges that face journalists are beyond our direct control. There are also some universal bugbears for those working in journalism, like workplace culture and online harassment, that we can address. When we asked our journalist fellows if they'd ever worked in a toxic newsroom, 82% said yes. Asked which aspects of toxic newsrooms had impacted their work experience, the most common complaint was poor leadership and micromanagement, 72%, and a lack of communication and transparency, 64%. About a third also mentioned harassment and bullying, high pressure and unrealistic expectations, and a lack of diversity and inclusion. Half cited inadequate resources. Today's guest is Editor-in-Chief Dhanya Rajendran, a digital pioneer who co-founded the News Minute and was recently awarded the 2022 Chameli Devi Jain Award. Dhanya is known for championing inclusive workplace practices, including diversity, and for strong steps to counter online abuse. That's the briefing. Let's begin.
Well, hello and welcome to what is the final conversation in our academic year here at Reuters and the University of Oxford. It's the Global Journalism Seminar. We're feeling a bit bittersweet, but full of promise in terms of what our fellow journalists launch into. However, sadly, one of the realities that they go back to is often toxic newsrooms. What we don't want this to be is an exercise in sort of self-flagellation about how bad it is, but more a conversation about what kind of practical examples work, what kind of tools can be put in place, and what you could really look to do in your own newsroom. I can't think of a better person to speak to the issue. Dhanya Rajendran, who, as you just heard, is the founder of the News Minute. She is more than that, I think, an incredibly brave voice. Don't go to Dhanya if you want a sugar-coated opinion. And as a friend, I think she's always been known for her absolutely no-nonsense approach. And I think that's what we all appreciate for who she is, as also, I think, what she's brought into her own newsroom. Dhanya, thank you very much for joining in. Thank you for being so gamely about it, because I know you're not feeling well. And I'm glad that you could still join us, because I think there's a lot for people to take away from this chat. The introduction is that you're a pioneer and that you founded the News Minute, but I think it would be great for all of our audience to hear a little bit about your journalistic career, because that's not the only thing you've done, and you've actually been through a lot of newsrooms of varying kinds before you decided to start something of your own.
Thank you, Mitali, for that kind introduction. So I've been a journalist for 20 years. I started my job working for a news channel, Malayalam news channel. Malayalam is one of the languages in India. In fact, one of the languages which sort of pioneered the news channel culture. So the first 24-hour news channel in India was actually in Malayalam, and I was one of their first employees. I worked out of India's capital, New Delhi, and I worked in such a toxic newsroom that I took a train 8 months or 10 months into the job. I took a train in unreserved compartment, which a lot of people who have not lived in India cannot imagine. It's basically a train compartment where people without tickets just come. It's very crowded. So from Delhi, I took the ticket and just switched off my phone and escaped and came to Chennai. After that, I've never left the southern part of India and gone to work in any other places, because my first experience was very scary. Then after a small break or a small stop at a newspaper, I joined one of India's new television channels called Times Now. I worked there for 8 years. So a lot of people ask me, how did you survive there? So, when the first experience is really bad, then the second experience becomes bearable.
Oh,
so that was fine. Yeah. So that is how I looked at it. And then I founded the News Minute in 2014 without any idea as to what I want to do. But I just knew that I cannot go back to a newsroom which is currently being run in India by different editors, whether it's TV or print. I was very clear that I don't want to go back to a newsroom. Then I thought, in India, you cannot take a sabbatical. If you take a sabbatical, especially when you are successful and you take a sabbatical, everybody is worried for you. Your family, your friends are constantly calling and asking, what is your next job? When is your next job? So I had to have a next job. Therefore, I decided not going back to media. Let's start something on my own, which is how the News Minute was started. And there was also this whole this whole vacuum to actually fill, because in India a lot of news is very Delhi or Bombay driven, and a lot of other states don't get their due when news comes. So I thought we should report more from these states and put them on the national map.
As you did, and I think it was a first of its kind when you launched it, and that's really been the USP of what you drive at the News Minute. My next question is kind of really broad and deep, but I think it takes this conversation where we would like to, which is, how do you, to your mind, define what a toxic newsroom is? And is that often a blurred line, especially in a profession like journalism? You and I both know from experience from television industry, for example, for a long time, the narrative was just suck it up. If you have a problem with this, go to the washroom, cry it out, and then get back to work and get on screen. Is it a more blurred line for journalism? And what do you define as the signs of a toxic news space?
So, Mitali, I can describe a toxic news space, but because most of the people listening here, I presume, are young journalists who will go back to jobs, or perhaps they've taken a break to study and will, some of them may be freshers. I just want to say that sometimes we should not also throw around words when we say a place is toxic or a person is toxic. It becomes problematic, right? I'm not someone who likes to throw away words, which is a newsroom toxic or not. But I definitely feel that the culture of newsroom is unhealthy in Indian television space. I have never worked in the print space, therefore I'm not aware of it, and I shouldn't speak on behalf of the print journalists. But the television space in India is very unhealthy. And I think the problems are the same, that there is no respect for a person's time. There is always a sense of urgency and emergency pushing people to continuously meet deadlines, to follow a story, to produce it. And you're not appreciated if you take an off. You cannot take your leaves, and there is a lot of yelling and screaming. I think people working in some of the other countries may not even be able to imagine the kind of belittling which happens in Indian newsrooms. I've had an editor who used to throw a chair when he got angry. People throw stuff on other people's faces. They will not let you have your lunch or dinner breaks. That is seen as, as something, as a reward. If you take a lunch break for more than a certain period of time, or even if you take a lunch break, that's seen as breaking the shift and going. So I think, and the problem when the newsroom becomes really intolerable is when the top boss is doing that. He or she then makes the second rung do the exact same thing. They do it to the next batch, and sort of everyone who comes into the system, like I have been there, I have done it, therefore I know how it works. Most of the time, maybe I do not want to be that horrible boss, but I have no other option because the person above me is driving me crazy. Therefore, I drive other people crazy. So that is how most newsrooms work. And I think in India, one huge problem is the lack of diversity in newsrooms, the lack of inclusivity in newsrooms. I'm not talking just about gender. It's just not about having more women in the newsroom, but there's no intersectionality in newsrooms. Even if you have more women, they are not from different castes or communities. For those who don't perhaps understand caste, in India, Hinduism has something called caste, where people are born into certain castes, and therefore, in most Indian newsrooms, for decades have been run by Hindu upper caste men. So the people who work under them are also Hindu upper caste men, or the others who become news leaders are Hindu upper caste women like me. So there is a lack of intersectionality in newsrooms. There is no diversity, and that also really brings in a toxic culture, because when someone else joins the newsroom, you do not know what to do with them. You do not know how to assimilate them, how to listen to their lived experiences. And in many cases, they become isolated and they're forced to leave these newsrooms.
And there's so much to unpack there. On the limited point of gender, I will say it's what statistics are bearing through as well. At Reuters, we've done a fact sheet on about 14 countries, and we found that only about 22% of the 240 brands that we looked at had women editors. And that's just one spectrum of diversity, as you said. There's a whole lot else. earlier this week, we were speaking at the Digital News Report to editors across India, and some of them made the point that as persons from marginalized communities, young journalists are often choosing news platforms where they are paid far less only because they're treated better, as opposed to the way they're treated in some of these mainstream channels. So, how hard did you think about diversity, Dhanya? I mean, did you sort of put in practical tools saying, here's how we want to mix and match it? Or was it an organic process saying, we're going to be as open as we can?
So it's been a combination of both, Mitali. When I started the News Minute, we had only 3 people. At that time, I did not think of diversity or how to hire.
Yeah.
But see, generally what happens is when, so I let me be very practical here. If I was working for a mainstream media organization, I don't think I would have become the editor at the age of 32 when I started the News Minute. Now, I am one of those statistics, right? When you count how many news organizations have women editors in India, I am that statistic which has taken up the number of women editors. But the reality is, I am that statistic because I started my own organization where I made myself the editor. But would somebody else have made me the editor? Definitely not, and not at that age for sure. So now, having set that aside, when I first started, I did not have the luxury of thinking that I will be diversifying when I hire. That thought came to me after only 1 or 2 years because I realized that news. Or when I started, it said there were only 3 women in the newsroom, and when there were 3 women in the newsroom, I also realized that the way we look at things, like even a small crime, is very different from how general newsrooms look at things. Then I started thinking that maybe lived experiences matter in newsrooms and we should have more women in the newsroom. So it was a conscious call to then hire more women, and not just as reporters, but as editorial leaders. So we had our reporting head who was a woman. We had our features head who's a woman. Then we had our editorial desk head who was a woman. So that was a conscious decision we took. But after 4 or 5 years of having women leading editorial positions, the next problem or the next question before us was, what about intersectionality? We are all still upper caste women. So we needed to have people from other religions who are not just Hindus. We needed to have people from marginalized communities. So there was a conscious effort that while hiring, we will look at all this. Many times we may not be able to hire the way we want. Many times we were not even unable to ask the question as to which community do you belong to, because a lot of people do not want to be identified that way also. So it has not been a very easy process. But today we have a newsroom with 6 news leaders, of which 4 are women, 2 are men. 1 man is a Muslim man and 1 man is a Dalit man. And there are 4 women, out of which 1 is Christian. So the thing is, it cannot always be a conscious choice, right? Because sometimes we also have to fill the vacancies, and the only resumes we get are from a certain kind of people or from a certain group or religion or whatever it is. Sometimes it is not possible, but wherever it is, we have tried. But I'm also realistic. We're able to do it because we're a small newsroom. We are only around 30 journalists. If I was running a newsroom with way more people, would I be able to do the same thing? I do not know.
I might actually counter that by saying it's probably easier to do that in a large organization where you can put metrics in place. And, so much of what you're saying, Dhanya, is the Indian experience. But I think for newsrooms across the world, there are people from indigenous communities, there are people from marginalized communities. It's when you start thinking about it consciously that you make space for those voices in the room. I'm going to pause here. My aced television skills seem to indicate that there's a glare, which I will try and correct. I hope this is better, guys. And I'm sorry if all you're seeing is a shining beam. The diversity is one part of this, Dhanya. In terms of when you were sitting down and thinking about what you wanted to put in as a culture, it's sometimes easier to say we are okay with this, and more difficult to say we are not okay with this. Did you guys have 3 or 4 hard lines saying this is a no-go and there's absolutely no way we're going to allow this in our newsroom?
See, when compared to other Indian newsrooms, I think a couple of things that we had very strictly decided is harassment. In the sense, sexual harassment, to be very particular about, we wouldn't indulge with any freelancers, anyone who any of our reporters have ever said has harassed them, has behaved in a suspicious way. We would immediately discourage any association with that person. But see, I also want to just little bit tell you about our own journey. So
Yeah.
while, yes, we did try about, talk about diversification and everything, when the pandemic started, people in my office, my colleagues did push back saying that things were getting very difficult for them because when the pandemic started, there was just so much news to deal with. And, we were not able to give proper offs and it was just getting too much.
Yeah.
So I also come from television, right? So I feel that people have to be available when there is news. Or I don't call people an off day, but it's drilled in my head that journalists have to be cognizant of what's happening around them 24/7. I come from that culture, but I was told that, look, hey, that is not fine. So 2 years ago, I think 2.5 years ago, we decided to make from a 6-day work week, we made it 5-day work week. That's not something which I agreed very happily because I did not want to. But everybody said that that will make the News Minute a better workspace. And I thought, okay, if everyone is really vouching for it, then let's do it. So we have a 5-day work week. I think the issue is that we have to listen. I just saw a question here as to someone asking how to handle bullying. Anything that happens in newsroom, first thing, the newsroom has to be cognizant that these problems are happening, that there is bullying in my newsroom, there is harassment in my newsroom, or people are not being onboarded properly. When newsrooms do not even understand that, we are always thinking, I'm a journalist, I'm doing this out of the world exercise, I'm saving the world, I'm saving humanity, I'm saving democracy, and it's such an important job, and you just ignore every other human rights in your own office
Yeah.
because you feel that you are living for a greater purpose. So I think we have to pause at times and then look behind and see, are there people suffering because of us? Do people in our office feel that the culture here is not right? That kind of like a bookkeeping has to be done often. Otherwise, the cycle will not stop.
Yeah. Um, I don't want to sound like a dinosaur, but I might. So, let me bring in generational diversity as well. Uh, was that a challenge? As you said, you come from television, which is, it's a function of the medium, but it's also a function of the time that we were television journalists. You were meant to be on 24 hours. Did you have to do a lot of unpacking yourself as the leader of a newsroom while dealing with different generations that may have different ideas about how to be a journalist?
No, definitely. I mean, in the beginning, I was quite resentful about it that many people wouldn't. If 8 o'clock is the time that they log off, people do really log off. And I couldn't first understand what is
What
happening. So
the hell?
steadily, I did. And I lose it only when, for example, a train accident happened recently where 270 people died. Now, that's an incident for which I think everybody has to be there. And then you can't say 8 o'clock, I will drop out of my shift, right? It did take me a long time to understand, but I also realized that you have to respect the different ways in which people work. I can still work 24/7, but that does not make me any less or any more of a journalist than someone who can do that much work efficiently within 5 days. So I'm okay with that now. But I don't want to pretend to be a saint. There are some times when I'm like, I wish people work more or people were there for 7 days. But clearly, since we have a policy in office, I can't force people to. Um,
You sound almost disappointed.
yeah. No, as in there are days like when you think, why are people not replying? But I do tell my colleagues that I understand that everybody has their personal issues. You have to go back to your families. I have a lot of young women in my office. Many of my reporters are in their 20s. So there's a lot of pressure from their families to get married. Very typical Indian problem. The families just want to get them married. So there is a lot of pressure on them. Then they have friends they have to meet. They have a life beyond office. But I do tell them that whatever problems you face, maybe you even have mental health issues, you have issues with your family, etc., etc. Yes, take time out for yourself, but remember that this is a job, unfortunately, where we're telling stories of other people. So that one day when you are really down as a human being and you're feeling like you're feeling absolutely no positivity to go on, unfortunately, somebody has died, or there is a story waiting to be written, someone needs justice, or someone needs help. There are those occasions when you have to put that thought about yourself a little behind and write that story. It doesn't come often, but when it comes, I think as a journalist, you have to make that choice. I mean, unfortunately, the job demands that.
And I do remember, it was quite a heartwarming example where it was around a New Year's Eve, a couple of years back, I think, that the News Minute put out a note saying, we're shutting down operations for the next 3 or 4 days. If you want to get the news, go to another platform because we're
Yeah.
taking a break. Were you sort of pushed into that decision, or
No,
was
no,
it
no. That
collaborative?
I did it wholeheartedly because every 31st December, I cannot sit and worry who's on the shift, is somebody putting the news. There were basically when I was working for the TV channel, I was partying on 31st and I was drunk. And I went home and I slept. On January 1st, I wake up from frantic calls from my desk. Everybody is screaming at me because the hotel that I was partying in the next hotel, a swimming pool, they made a party, they made this whole floor on top of the swimming pool and they had a dance floor on top of swimming pool. I don't know which kind of idiot makes that. And it collapsed and some 2 or 3 people died. So I was unaware of this and I slept. So I mean, after that, I've never been able to celebrate New Year in peace. I'm always worried that something is happening that I'm not aware of. So I decided I cannot have that in my newsroom where nobody can celebrate New Year because they are thinking that some news is going to be missed. So we decided New Year we are shut. 31st we don't put out any news. News will happen. It can't wait for the News Minute or for Dhanya or for anyone. Read it elsewhere.
Fair point. Is there, just to go back to practical tools, is there an SOP in place? I mean, for someone who is a part of the News Minute and a journalist there or an editor there and feels like they would like to talk about an incident that they may see as, toxic behavior, is there an SOP in place? And how do you create a space that feels safe? Sometimes as a junior reporter, it's not easy to go to your editor and say, I felt very wronged about this. You may hesitate.
So we have different tiers of leaders. Of course, I may be the editor in chief, but there are people who deal with this. First, the bureau chief. We have 5 different states. There are 5 bureau chiefs who's your first level to go to if you have a problem. But if your problem is with the bureau chief himself or herself, who do you go to? Then you go to the next person who's a reporting head or the executive editor. Then you can always come directly to the editor in chief, but there are layers and people are told that if you have complaints, please come and tell. And we have reviews every 6 months or every year. So in these review meetings, people are encouraged. But see, despite all that, I can guarantee and tell you that people don't open up about issues because there is a culture of fear that you cannot speak up against your seniors, no matter how friendly or how unfriendly the newsroom. That the culture of fear still persists, I feel. So we need to have more open conversations and tell people that look, if you think the culture in the newsroom is not right, then speak up about it. At least put your point across. Whether it gets solved or not is for later, right? But put your point across.
There's a question here on exactly that. So let me probe this a bit further, saying especially in Asian newsrooms, there is this tendency to be sort of subordinate to someone who is above you. Do you inculcate that when you take people in saying, we're not that hierarchical, or is it just part of the community and people pick that up while working there?
I think people pick that up a lot. People, in fact, sometimes during the editorial meetings, when I say, I don't like the story, we shouldn't do it, and the reporter just keeps quiet, I'm taken aback. I'm like, fight for your own story, fight with me, tell me I'm wrong. So I think dissent is something that we discourage in Indian young people. From your school to college to everywhere, you just disallow them from questioning anybody in authority. Your teacher says, your teacher hits you in school, you are not allowed to question. Your principal runs a school in a certain way, you don't question. Dissent is something which we as a society discourage. And I think that just shines across every other job, I feel, and journalism is no exception.
Let me talk about a much broader issue, because I think this is something that you speak to quite openly, which is online harassment. And I know that you have faced a lot of it, and you've actually, differently from some others, chosen to take that on. You frequently engage with the person who may have written a hateful comment, you respond to it, you provide answers. Was that a journey as well for you? And at the start, did you choose to ignore it and then you thought, well, what the hell, I'm going to take you on?
Yeah, I will explain. I just read that question, especially in Asian culture, there is a stereotype to obey whoever is in position. I
Yeah.
agree with that. And I feel that it is very difficult for people to get out of that rut. And it becomes even more difficult sometimes in newsrooms when you're not allowed to question people in higher positions. And, there is really, for every problem that you face in a newsroom, there is no one solution to it. It's how each person deals with it. You will have to figure your way out. For example, when I was in TV, one simple problem that I faced is I would be made to do live coverage of things that I did not agree about. I did not want to do that coverage and I did not agree with that story. So what do? I get shouted at if I don't cover the story. So one simple trick I used to do is that I'll put the earpiece and I'll pretend like I'm not able to hear the anchor. And I'll be like, hello, hello. So, I mean, this is a funny episode, just a funny anecdote I'm telling you. But
I can just imagine your news editor having, a
no, but all of
cardiac
us,
arrest.
yeah, I mean, the coping mechanisms are very different for each person, right? Unfortunately, if a newsroom is really toxic, then at least five people who are brave enough will have to come together and fight it. Now, to the question of online harassment, see, initially, online harassment was not too much because there were not too many people who were using. I was one of those early journalists, early adapters of social media. So it started slowly and steadily. A few years ago, one of my first experiences of mass online trolling was when I wrote a very obnoxious tweet about a movie. And in the next 3 days, there were like 50, 60,000 tweets calling me a prostitute, sex worker, rape threats, etc., from this actor's fans. That is the first time, and it has nothing to do with journalism. It is just that I, as a journalist, had a little bit of a following. Therefore, my tweet was more visible. And but it had its own cycle. From then, I started getting abused. I mean, I don't even like to use the word troll because I feel that sort of brings down the intensity of the problem. We're basically being harassed online, and it just got worse and worse when more political parties started doing it. When the News Minute became a much more, vocal in what it believes in, the harassment was unbearable. So in the beginning, I used to feel very upset. I used to have nightmares about it. I couldn't sleep properly. My eyelids used to shiver, and I did not know how to deal with it. In fact, I could not even vocalize it to my family, to my office people, because I felt that, oh my God, people would think less of me if they felt that I'm being threatened online, or I'm feeling harassed. So what happened is, when after this actor's episode got over, another woman went through the same experience as me, but she had it worse than me. So I reached out to her saying that I understand how you feel. Just shut off everything. We became good friends. And then slowly we made this whole gang of around 5, 6 women who were all harassed online, but we could vocalize with each other. So one thing for me was to find that one coping mechanism, which is a group of people who could understand. And the second thing is that, as an organization, each organization has to take online harassment very seriously. They cannot tell their reporters, no, no, it's okay, just leave it and mute it and go. You have to understand that it is a problem. And once you understand it's a problem, you have to tell your colleagues that, okay, this is happening. We are aware of it. What do you want us to do? Do you want us to put out a statement? Do you want us to just mute the account for some time? Do you want us to block report people? This conversation has to happen in newsrooms. And of course, as journalists, you have to figure out. I mean, if you want to be in social media, you are going to get blowback for it. How are you going to deal with it? All the platforms themselves give you a lot of tools like block, report, mute. But beyond that, do you want to file police complaints? Do you want to do something about it? These are choices you have to make. Of course, for me, there has been a whole trajectory from filing a police complaint. Now, I actually relax every week. I give myself at least 50 minutes to 1 hour. I just go through my account, see who's abusing me, and I troll them back. I've made it a hobby because there's no other way out, right? So when people think that, okay, she doesn't care if you abuse, they'll slowly stop. But I'm not suggesting that as a way out for anyone else. That is my own way of dealing with it. You must find your way.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's important to sort of create some insulation for people working within the newsroom and what they face with online harassment. Do you extend that to contributors, Dhanya? This is the tricky one for me, where a lot of journalists today are working independently. That's the way the profession has sort of moved. And often they find themselves quite alone in situations such as this, where it is extremely toxic. It is a function of their work. They've written for a particular platform, but they don't belong to that platform. So they feel quite alone in this harassment.
See, there are only very few ways in which we can help. One is to, of course, reach out to them and say that, look, we are aware of the problem. We are there, don't worry. There was once a story that we put out about slavery in the coffee estates of Kodagu, which is a place in South India, very highly educated people who run coffee estates. And that was perhaps a story for which we got the most amount of threats written by a freelancer. So finally, we told her, it's fine. We are aware that this is happening. If you need any help, you come. But it is much more difficult, Mitali, if there are freelancers who face harassment because of a story. I mean, legally, if there's a legal issue, we can help them. But beyond a point, there's not much that we can do as a platform. We can simply maybe put out a social media statement saying that we stand with them. We have not faced it too many times, except for this one or two occasions. And in the news bullet, it's a bit strange. When I tweet, people get a lot of hate. So I generally, if it's a very controversial take, I tend to not tag the person because I will be dragging hate onto their timeline. So I tell them there's a reason why I didn't tag you, because then I would be dragging that hate onto your timeline. But yes, this is a question we have to really ponder. And freelancers in India do a lot of really important journalism, especially reporting on the fascist tendencies of the government.
Yeah. And I know you're being a bit nonchalant about it, but it can't be easy to sort of identify yourself as that, as an editor, you're tweeting out a story, but you're also aware that it brings all this hate with it. Has that been difficult, Dhanya? The fact that it's still toxic, it's just shifted from inside the newsroom to outside the newsroom and into these social media platforms.
It's difficult in the sense that it doesn't upset me anymore. See, forget what your personal feelings are, right? For I think what all young journalists, senior journalists, what everybody needs to know is that the abuse and the harassment is one side. That is fine. We will deal with it in our own way. Maybe we will not deal with it. I've seen people having breakdowns because of that. I'm going to leave that aside. The other is a pressure to operate in a certain way, to write a story in a certain way, because all these people are telling you your story is wrong, you are biased, you write differently. I think that is what we have to be more aware of. That the kind of pressure which comes from social media, especially if political parties are behind you, they don't like the way that you're writing things. They are going to make their bots like 1,000, 2,000 people coming and abusing on a daily basis. And then what happens is, first you self-censor. You self-censor on social media. I don't write a lot of things on social media anymore because I'm like, why waste my time getting abused by some people? So I don't write things. But the moment I self-censor my work, I believe that, oh, I shouldn't write about this particular issue because the government will be angry with me or the political party will be angry with me and they're going to harass me. That is a real danger of social media, that it is actually making journalists get scared and they are self-censoring their work.
And would you say that's feeding into the newsroom as well, Dhanya? The point that you made about being forced to cover a story or an event. Now, in itself, it can't be labeled as clearly toxic. It's not abusive, it's not harassment, but you are being forced to toe a particular line. You're being forced to run behind, a particular celebrity for a quote. There have been instances in Indian news media where they've vaulted over the wall to get into the guest house and get, a news bite. In that sense, has it become worse rather than better for newsrooms?
100% it's become worse. There's a lot of pressure to follow a story, to follow a non-story sometimes, to follow a non-news angle. And I think half of India's news channels do that anyway, all the time. They are just following these controversies on social media. For example, a few weeks ago, the Indian government had said that their PR department, called the PIB, or the Press Information Bureau, will also do fact checks, which is the Press Information Bureau will do a fact check if a story which is on a government policy is correct or not. And this department has a horrible history of doing all sorts of bad fact checks. So I had this organization called DigiPub, which is India's first digital digital media association. So we strongly oppose that the government cannot bring a fact checker like this, which is a PIB, and we're also going to court. Now, 2 days ago, the so all the people in the BJP know that I'm one of those people who have been opposing this whole fact-checking policy that they want to bring in. So yesterday, the Congress government in Karnataka also announced that they will have a fact-check team for them. So I'm getting tagged and abused by everybody in the BJP saying, oh, you opposed ours, why are you not opposing the Congress? Now, if I fall into this game and I make everything about whataboutery, or I will criticize the Congress and I will criticize the BJP also. That is not my job. My job is to understand whether there's a fundamental difference between what the BJP and the Congress is proposing. If it is the same, yes, I will criticize both the same way. But 10 years ago, if this kind of harassment had happened on social media, trust me, I would have succumbed under the pressure and I would have done a story against the Congress immediately. But today, I know to give myself time to check what is the Congress suggesting. They're suggesting fact check on social media. Till now, they have not suggested a fact check on media houses. The moment they do, yes, we will stand against it. But the problem is that, it's like an echo chamber, right? People will just keep telling you, do the story, do this angle, you didn't do this. And a lot of journalists feel that pressure. Especially if you're opinionated on social media, you can expect more to come your way.
Let me bring in one of the questions that have come in online.
I'm sorry, I'm keeping on shifting. It's because I am, I'm not well, so that's why.
We're absolutely fine with you shifting. It's your voice we're listening to. There's a question online before I head to our journalist fellows, which says onboarding in newsrooms is a problem. I've seen that period when I was clueless about, what happens and how. Should newsroom seniors do onboarding for cub journalists? Do you do that? And do you discuss things like, this is what we consider toxic. This is the kind of space we're opening up for you.
So first thing, style sheets, not just for the language, but for a lot of things, on social media, how can you behave? What does the company expect from you? If you're covering a Me Too case, for example, what does the company expect you to do? How are you? What terms do you use, etc. We have a lot of style sheets. After they read all that, we do have sessions where we talk about what is expected, what is not expected, and then slowly we do tell them that yes, in the newsroom, this is your immediate boss. The next boss, you can come and share your problems with them. But like I said, maybe we don't do enough. The onboarding, because somebody asked this question, I'm just thinking, most of the onboarding is related to work, how not to do certain work, how to do certain work, right? I don't think the onboarding is primarily about how does the organization function? How can you be safe within the organization? So maybe that's something I have to think about.
Okay, let me head to our room where our journalist fellows are waiting by, and I think some of them have questions. Is it Umfo who has the first question?
Hi, Dhanya. It's Umfo here from South Africa. I wanted to ask you, you're an editor-in-chief, right? So you're sitting at the top and you've got people, seniors who report to you and they're responsible for the reporters that they lead. And in a bid to try to create some form of accountability, what are your thoughts on a mutual performance management, performance appraisal kind of system? So right now, most newsroom have manager to reporter, and that's how it works. And you as the editor-in-chief have to trust that the manager is doing all the things that they should do to make sure that the environment is safe for their reporter. But what are your views on having and adding another system on top of that, where the reporter gets to give some kind of feedback on the manager, so that there's a bit more accountability, and for you to have a little bit of an added layer of confidence in that the tools that you're setting into the newsroom are actually working both ways?
So, like I said, there is a review which happens every 6 months, and then so in that review, people are. It's not just the manager who sits in the review; it's another person also who sits in the review, which could be me or another senior, so that these people are encouraged. But one feedback that we got this time is that perhaps maybe the manager shouldn't sit in the review. So that's something that I need to think about and then incorporate that. But yes, what you're suggesting is important. How do you tell young people again and again that do come to someone who's not your manager to share your problems? But like I said, we do have a 3-tier structure now, so hopefully that is happening. But as most things we learn, especially when you run an organization, it's when a problem happens that you learn, and then you want to change how the system has been operating. So yeah, I mean, last time is when I got this this whole feedback that the manager should not even be sitting in the review, or that the manager should not be sitting alone in the review. So these are things that we'll have to change now.
I'm muted. Daria, go ahead, and then I'll bring in the next one.
Hi. Thank you so much for this presentation. Dhanya from Norway. I am wondering how you think as a chief editor when the people you have employed are doing something wrong and you're going to deal with it. For instance, if you have a middle manager who shows signs of bullying junior journalists, when is the right time to show zero tolerance and fire that middle manager versus trying to correct the behavior? Because when you have signs of bullying in a newsroom, many more than the person who is the direct victim of this will notice, will start talking, the notion will spread, people will be afraid. Then when you deal with it, the way you're dealing with it will be noticed by everybody. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how does a top chief editor practically approach the situation?
I can give you two examples. One is that there is a particular manager who there's feedback that people are unhappy. It was not exactly bullying, but it was perceived as bullying. Now, why do I say it is not exactly bullying is because sometimes you also know, right? I mean, when there's a certain expectation a manager has of another person and the expectation doesn't meet, it becomes a very, I don't know, the whole environment becomes non-conducive, and that is perceived as bullying by the other person. But the other person has to be also told that, look, you're not meeting the expectations, which is something that you need to be aware of. And the manager has to know that when you're not meeting expectation, you cannot be run down continuously. That cannot be the solution. So the conversation has to be to both these people, not just the manager. Now, one problem I've encountered is that when a manager is a bully, there are a lot of people who don't want to complain. So it just works like a whisper network in the office where everybody's telling each other and not me that this person is a bully. And when somebody comes to me secondhand and says this other person had this experience, I'm like, can someone please tell me so that I can raise it? This is something I face often, where people, that's because, like I said, how much ever you encourage people to come and complain, I feel that culture of silence is very prevalent. People don't want to actually complain. They feel like they will be singled out. They'll be looked as the troublemaker. So this is a problem I face, that people don't want to, if they are bullied, they don't want to give a complaint, and then we are at a loss on how to deal with it.
Here's an important question from one of our fellows who couldn't unfortunately be in the room, Dhanya. Ayan represents America and South Sudan, and she asks, is there a way...
Ayan's here.
Ayan's here!
Hi, Natalie. Yes, I'm here.
Question.
Thank you. This has been really great. Thank you for having this. I'm just wondering if there's a way to measure the financial cost of toxicity in newsrooms, because I've seen colleagues who quiet quit. I've seen colleagues who lose motivation at the expense of their performance. And I have to imagine that at the end of the day, this the consequence, part of the consequence is our bottom line. So is there a way to measure the financial cost of toxicity in newsrooms?
That's a very interesting thought, the financial losses, right? I mean, most of the attrition in newsrooms is not even because there is one bully or two bullies. It's because the newsroom itself has a culture which does not allow people to stay for too long, especially when it's women in the newsroom. So what is I think, yeah, that's definitely something we can look at. And it's not just financial loss, right? It's also career loss for a lot of people. They come for this job. They work here 3 to 5 years and they realize that this is not doable because the working hours are too stringent, the working hours are too taxing, and especially, I mean, I don't know if I can speak for women across the world, but here at least, a lot of families don't want women to be in journalism because they feel it is unsafe. The offices do not give them a safe environment structure, and the structure itself is very patriarchal. So I feel that the loss is not just to the company, but it's also personal career loss to a lot of people, a lot of women especially, who are forced to leave, and we don't account for it. So I think that's a really nice thought, and maybe we should put a number to it. I mean, someone should do some research and put a number to this. This previous news channel I used to work with, if I go to my Facebook account and I choose one person who's a friend who worked with me, I may have 700 to 800 mutual friends, because in the 8 years that we worked together, that many people have come and gone because they just couldn't survive the newsroom. And I'm not at all exaggerating. Sometimes I have 700 to 800 mutual friends with people, simply because these are people who exited the newsroom and we were not even aware of it sometimes.
Asif from Bangladesh has a question as well. Asif.
Start again.
You mentioned something really interesting. Oh, should I do it again?
Yeah.
Oh, hi Dhanya, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned something really interesting, and that was a situation where you were assigned to do something, but you were uncomfortable fulfilling the assignment because the angle is something you didn't agree with, or maybe the topic itself was problematic. How could you talk about that a little bit, and also discuss how should newsroom managers deal with that sort of situation? Should junior reporters be allowed to recuse themselves? How should this work?
No, definitely. I mean, so when people join at the News Minute, I tell them first thing that if you're uncomfortable doing a story, you have to tell us. And the second thing is, as a journalist, sometimes you go for a story and you realize it should not be reported, because the consequences that a person you report about, that consequence that person is going to face is much more severe, will be much more severe if you report. So there are stories which you don't write about. The Me Too the Me Too movement is an example. There are a lot of people who come to us because they're triggered, they're angry, they're sad. So I tell them that, look, we should not be writing your story, because in this moment of anger, you want to come out and speak, but there is absolutely no proof, corroboration for what you say. And the blowback that you're going to receive, the legal repercussions are way too huge. Your question is about, should journalists be told to say no to a story? Definitely. Stories that they're not comfortable with, stories that they don't agree with, stories that they feel are appropriation, right? See, beyond a point, can a person from a upper caste in India keep on reporting about atrocities on lowered caste without getting into uncomfortable questions? How long can you allow that reporting? So these are questions that I have had Dalits in my newsroom who have come and told me that they don't want to report on violence on Dalits because it really makes them uncomfortable, sad, and triggered. So then I have to remove them from reporting. So yes, this is a problem. But see, I always wonder what happens to those journalists who work in right-wing fascist newsrooms, right-wing newsrooms. In India, the biggest problem is that most of our channels are more right-wing than the party which rules the country itself. And they are very communal. They are highly bigoted. People are working in those newsrooms without agreeing to any of these ideologies. And there is a huge discussion in India whether these journalists deserve any sympathy at all, because they continue to work in these newsrooms despite knowing the fact that these newsrooms are damaging our social fabric. I mean, like a Fox in America, if you can take a comparison, right? If there is a journalist working there, do you feel sympathetic for the journalist anymore because you have taken that job knowing what that channel stands for, what the network stands for? So I don't know, these are tough questions. You have bills to pay, your families to look after. That's the only job you get. And in that job, where do you draw the line? I know of so many of my friends who worked in these channels or newspapers, and every single day was a struggle for them. Every single day they'll be asked to report news where they do not believe in it ideologically. So I don't know, there is really no one solution for it. But in an open newsroom, every journalist should be told to voice if they don't want to do a particular story or want to write about something.
Another question from Felipe Watanabe from Brazil.
Hi, Dhanya. Hello. I think that there probably, in the majority of the media houses across the world, there is a toxic trace that is related to the overload of work and the always on and ready kind of lifestyle. And I was thinking, how can we shift from that to a proper work-life balance culture that is real and not just like blah, blah, blah and small talk? Considering that we are kind of expected to be kind of workaholic, like always on, always doing something, always digging stories. So how can we put in practice something more humane for reporters?
I think, see, I mean, I understand all these questions, but the problem is, I mean, these are things we're talking about every week here also, right? But I feel like there's no actual change unless the leadership of an organization wants to push that change. The industry itself does not have any rules. For example, in India, we have something called the wage board, which actually prescribes what is the minimum wage for a person who works. And journalism does not even come under that. So people are really paid badly across journalistic organizations because even our wages are not regulated. So it has to be company to company. Unfortunately, it has to be organizations which decide. And there is really no other solution. Period leave. I know of one organization in India which announced period leave for its women employees. 1 year later, we did a small check whether people are availing period leave. Nobody was, because the men in the office were making fun of them, saying, oh, this is your cycle. So, it's not just enough sometimes having policy. You have to have that workroom culture. How are you going to tell people in your office that I'm going to institute period leave? You have to be welcoming of this policy, and you have to make the women in your newsroom feel safe. So there is really no... Sorry, I have 4 cats and 1 dog. So somebody was fighting, that's where I look. Yeah. To your question about how do we make things more humane, it has to come from every single newsroom. And I do see change. I see that a lot of smaller newsrooms are changing. The reason because people like me have left those big newsrooms and come. So we understand what was going wrong there. But the big newsrooms have to drive this change. For example, Reuters has policies, right? The New York Times may have policies when it comes to diversity, when it comes to hiring. In India, there are no such policies. So first, it has to be at a policy level. Second is to ensure that these policies are well understood in companies. And there has to be a shift in the way we perceive journalism. That journalism cannot be a 24-hour, 24/7 pressure cooker job where everybody just feels like they're being cooked every minute. And they have to be at the beck and call of their bosses, except when there is a real good demand for it. I feel that the moment we realize that people are better workers, better colleagues, better employees, if they have a rounded life where they have families and friends to go back to, if not, they have something to watch on TV, they just want to chill. They don't want to do anything else. They don't want to work for 2 days. I think if we are accepting that culture, that's fine. I just want to say something. One event that I was in, I was actually moderating the event when a senior journalist, I mean, I'm senior myself, but someone way more senior than me said that you should all be thick-skinned when you're journalists. Journalists should be thick-skinned. So the younger person in that panel immediately opposed, saying that I don't think that is a necessity. You don't have to be thick-skinned to be a journalist. You can have any kind of skin and be a journalist. And if you are in trouble, then it is for your newsroom to help you. And I felt really good that in a huge auditorium with so many people, this man could become her boss in the next 2 years, but that did not deter her from saying that. So I think people making these points across also may help newsrooms change. So we need to cultivate that culture where people just say that this is not done.
We're completely out of time, and you've done the big reveal, Dhanya, which was going to be my last question, saying, where are the cats? Is that sort of part of the decompressing process, saying, okay, I'm done with the madness of work. I'm going home to my furry babies?
Yes, 8:30 to 9:30 in the evening is my cat feeding routine where I feed my 4 house cats and then I feed stray cats. At that time, no matter what happens, I will not pay attention. So all 7 days I do this as a routine. I'm not, and by the way, the cat lady is actually a very positive word. Please read about it. So I'm very happy to be identified as a cat lady. So newsrooms are difficult places, and the culture is unfortunately not. I mean, I can only talk for the country that I work in. The culture is not changing very rapidly, but I think there is pushback now, and hopefully that pushback will work. More and more news organizations will realize that the like one of the fellows here was saying, the cost of a toxic newsroom is high. The cost of the company itself is high. In fact, I mean, it's a brilliant idea when you think of it, right? When you're going to tell the owner of a newsroom that the cost of your toxic newsroom is high level of attrition. You know, you are training people, but they're just leaving your newsroom because you do not have a good newsroom, can actually be an incentive to build a good newsroom. So I think maybe Reuters should think about doing some sort of a survey on what is the cost of a toxic newsroom. And that will force people, if not anything else, the economics of it will force people to have better newsrooms.
No, I agree completely. And I was going to say, I'm going to connect you and IN, and I'm sure there's more that you all can both talk about to it. Thank you, Dhanya. I know you're not keeping well. Thank you for making time for this. I wish one of your cats had sort of come prowling in, and that
I've
would have.
actually locked them up, which is the
Oh,
reason why I'm
no.
here.
But it's always a pleasure speaking with you. And thank you for taking all our questions on. So
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
okay, well, Dhanya, and for everyone else, we'll see you in a new academic term. So take care of yourselves till then.